Hey everybody, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website address is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. And today's video, again, I've been getting these questions. I really appreciate the good ones and the ones that it's clear that someone put some time and effort into asking the question. And today's is very good. And I encourage all of you guys to send your questions because they make for excellent content. I found that in the 3.5 years I've been doing this blog, by far the most popular blog posts are not the ones that I think or I was expecting to be popular. They're the ones that are just simple responses to people's questions. This tells me that if you have a question about research, more than likely someone else has that same question. And more than likely, they're Googling for these things. So keep them coming. Today's is very good, and I'll just get into it. It's basically how many study coordinators does a research clinic need given X amount of studies? And this is an excellent question. There is no magical formula. It really depends on, number one, how many studies your site is doing, and number two, how complex those studies are and how many people do you really need to conduct the study efficiently. And of course you'll need PIs and sub-Is, but as we all know, and maybe you don't, the backbone of any research trial is the study coordinator, the CRC, the clinical research coordinator, whatever it is you want to call them. The study coordinators are the backbone of any clinical trial, and there's no rule, there's no guidance from the FDA even on how many study coordinators are required. There is no requirement. In fact, theoretically a PI can do a study by himself or herself without hiring anyone. As long as he's willing to do all the procedures, he's willing to answer all the queries, he's willing to enter all the data, he's willing to interact with monitors, he or she can do a trial without hiring a coordinator. Now in reality, I don't think any clinical trial can be done without having a coordinator. So now the question is, how many coordinators does a site need? My rule is, the average study, if you actually plan on enrolling a good amount of subjects, so let's say you have a study where you're enrolling, or at least have one visit per week per patient. So then let's say you have about 4 visits a week because you have 4 patients enrolled in that study. Now let's say you get another study, and it also requires 1 patient visit a week, and you have another 4 visits, or another 4 patients in that study. That's now 8 study visits a day for 5 days, 8 study visits a week for 5 days, because most research sites are open Monday through Friday. So once you get to the point where you can't keep up with the study visits and you can't keep up with entering the data, because most sponsors require the data to be entered within 3 days, sometimes 2 days of the study visit, and you can't keep up with the pace, because some of these studies really are fast-paced, and the more you enroll, the more people you will need, the more support staff the PI will need to handle these visits. I've seen some very busy research centers where they have 5 study visits a day, 10 study visits a day, and they'll have a good amount of coordinators. They'll have like 5, 10 coordinators. My rule at South Coast is I give about 4 protocols per coordinator. So right now we have about 10 active trials, maybe 12. And I have about 3 coordinators at my busiest site, and 1 plus a research assistant at my other site. And I think that's a good metric to keep in mind is studies per coordinator. Now, mind you, these are all studies that we are busy for and we're actively recruiting for. So I think a coordinator should be able to handle, at minimum, one study visit a day. You can probably get away with 2 or 3 per coordinator, but at minimum it should be 1. If your site is averaging 4 visits a day, you probably need a second coordinator. You might even need 3, again, depending on how complex the studies are. Now, a lot of sites get into the problem where they'll get a lot of studies, and so they'll hire a lot of coordinators, and then all of a sudden they figure out that the studies are not that easy to recruit for, or they lose some of the studies a few months later because the sponsor canceled the studies, or they're just not getting any more studies, and now they're left with too much staff, and so they have to make layoffs. So it's always a balancing act between the amount of work that you have at your clinic versus how many coordinators you have. But for me, and for my type of trials, a good rule is at least 1 patient visit per coordinator. So knowing that I have 3 coordinators at one of my sites, I know that I at least have to have 3 study visits a day at my site. And we average about 4 or 5 a day. Sometimes a lot more, but never less. And that's the key, is you really want to find that balancing act. And it depends on the protocol. I mean, and of course it depends on your therapeutic area. In psychiatry, there's a lot of rating scales involved. The visits tend to be longer. So what I mean by 1 visit is usually a 4-hour visit. I know oncology trials are also very involved. Diabetes trials are also very involved. But if you have something like an asthma study or a hypertension study or a migraine study, they might be less involved. So you really need to know whether your coordinator can handle 2 visits a day, and can they handle 3. And if they can't, once you reach the point where they can't handle the visits that you have on a daily basis, then you know you need to hire a coordinator. And of course, this is not to mention all the behind-the-scenes stuff with the research assistants entering data and drawing blood and processing blood and taking vital signs and all those things, answering queries. But a good metric for me has always been at least a visit a day per coordinator, and that's not usually that much to ask for. In fact, you should be able to do a solid study coordinator should be able to handle 1 to 3 visits per day on a consistent basis. Hopefully this helps. Let me know. Maybe I'm way off. Maybe my whole theory is upside down. Let me know. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Dan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Quick shout out to my guru producers. It's Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, Resolve Research Solutions, Accurate Clinical Trials, Earnhardt Clinical Trials, PTNR, Patrick Stone, Darshan Kulkarni, Biopharm Systems, Zymewire, Mozio, South Coast Clinical Trials, Breakthrough Clinical Trials, and my most recent clinical trial guru producer, St. Paul Medical Research Center in Miami, Florida. Thank you very much. I'm only accepting 100 guru producers, so if you're interested, go to my blog, theclinicaltrialsguru.com, click on the producers page, shoot me an email, and keep sending your questions. These are excellent questions. Dan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com.